much for being patient with me. The big question tonight that we are going to be focused on is which outcome is best for the progressive movement, the overall health of the progressive movement, a Joe Biden win in the next few weeks, or a Donald Trump continued presidency if he were to win a second term. Which would be better for the overall health of the progressive movement? That is the big question. Thank you so much for watching. Those of you who are here for the live stream, I appreciate you. Thank you so much. Also, if you'd like to support the channel, the links are down below. I appreciate you. I will be taking some of your super chats on this subject throughout the broadcast tonight, since this is kind of a discussion between you and I about who would be better for the progressive movement, the overall health of the progressive movement, a Joe Biden win or a Donald Trump win. Now, first and foremost, I think what we need to do is establish what the progressive movement is that I'm talking about, because it's a bit murky. When I talk specifically about the progressive movement, I am mostly referring to what I would say the best, I guess, indication, or the best, I don't know what the right word is, but the Bernie Sanders 2016, I think his 2016 campaign was the best sort of representation of the progressive movement. So he focused largely on economic policies, largely focused on what was going to help the average working American, the kitchen table issues, living wages, workers' rights, Medicare for all, getting money out of politics. Those are the big progressive issues. Now, obviously, through time, and especially Bernie Sanders' 2020 campaign, I think that message shifted and it largely went into a different direction that we're seeing. And now a lot of times when the news or politicians refer to progressives, they're just talking about Democrats in general. And I think they're mostly referring to a lot of the social change, the social discussion. So a lot of the BLM, sexism, bigotry, racism, those types of discussions. I feel like that is what oftentimes people, when they say progressive, that's what they mean. That's not what I mean by progressive. For me, a progressive focuses mostly on economic policies. When we look at the social movement, the social change stuff that's going on, one of my big questions that I continue to have is, what policies are these politicians putting forward that are going to fix all of this racism and bigotry? And, what is it that they propose is actually going to fix these things? They don't really have any policies to fix those things, because it's very difficult to fix a cultural issue in people's day-to-day lives. If my next door neighbor is a racist, I don't really know what kind of policy is going to fix that. Obviously, if there's a protection from my neighbor being, rude to me, or not rude. I mean, I guess they could be rude to me all they want. I got plenty of neighbors who are rude to me. But if they want to, hinder me or not hire me or deny me services or something like that because I'm Vietnamese, and maybe they've got maybe they're an old Vietnam War vet and they hate Vietnamese people. I don't know, right? This has happened. So I don't know what policies these politicians can create to stop the bigot from being a bigot. But we do know that there's plenty of economic policies that our politicians could focus on. We could have Medicare for all. We could have affordable or free college educations. We could have living wages. We could have some controls on housing, or even, discuss the homelessness issue or drugs, or, there's a lot of things that they could deal with as politicians that they don't. So I would say that, when we're talking about progressives, we need to be very specific as to what I mean by that before we move forward in this conversation. Now, the progressive movement has stalled out a bit because the narrative shifted largely into the we're dealing with a fascist, racist, sexist. That is the existential crisis. We cannot focus on your silly ideas of Medicare for all or your silly ideas of, living wages. That's not important. What's important right now is we've got a fascist on our hands. What's important right now is, we're having an existential crisis. This is what the Democratic establishment always says in order to get people to continue to vote for them, even though they don't have any economic policies that are actually beneficial to the working class. Instead, they court Wall Street, they court big tech, they court their big money donors. They've increasingly taken more money from the healthcare industry, from big pharma, from big insurance, from the military industrial complex, and they want you to not notice. And instead, in order to get you to not notice, They instead want to focus on all of these sort of cultural issues, the cultural fight. Yes, George Washington had slaves 250 years ago. Don't you know what that means for you today? Your life is potentially going to be ruined because George Washington had slaves 250 years ago. That's kind of the argument that they continue to make, and sadly, people buy it. So that all being said, knowing that Joe Biden is the Democratic establishment, he is not a progressive. He is, by my standards, right-wing. He is more of a Republican. And so knowing this and knowing that he would not really put forward progressive policies, because I know the first thing people will say is, well, but Joe Biden will have more progressive policies than Donald Trump. So therefore, if you want the progressive movement to survive, you obviously would need to vote for Joe Biden, and you'd hope Joe Biden wins because he's going to have more of those progressive policies you want. This is the argument I hear all the time from mainstream Democratic voters. And you know what? Joe Biden has largely said that everything would remain the same, that things will not fundamentally change. He has said this over and over. He has said things to his big pharma donors like, you know, you guys need to stop price gouging. But he doesn't talk about pinning their prices to the prices of pharmaceuticals in other countries. When it comes to the military-industrial complex, Joe Biden is actively courting the generals and the military and the defense departments. You know, he's actively courting them, saying, oh, you know, Donald Trump is the big threat. Donald Trump is the dangerous one. Meanwhile, Joe Biden wants to put into his cabinet people like Susan Rice and Michelle Flournoy, who are known warmongers who come from the Bush warmonger era, and they are more in line with the Bush warmonger tactics. They believe in preemptive strikes, and those are the women that Joe Biden is considering putting into his cabinet. Now, a lot of Democratic voters will think, oh, that's so progressive of him. He put women in. Oh, isn't that nice? They're going to be less warmongery. No, they're not. They're way more warmongery than plenty of other people. They're very much like John Bolton. So Joe Biden would not march in progressive military policies. He would not bring in progressive healthcare policies. He claims that he is going to, strengthen the ACA or add in a single payer option. But these are all just lip service at this point. When it comes down to what he'll actually do, we know what he says to the donors behind closed doors, and that is nothing will fundamentally change. So with Joe Biden, I don't think you can make the argument that, well, but if he wins, you're going to have more of your progressive policies. I just think we're going to have somebody who says they're going to be for these progressive policies, but when it comes down to it, maybe they do little token incremental sort of things that don't really hurt their donors' bottom line. It's very incremental. It doesn't make substantial change. And meanwhile, their donors are allowed to continue to rob the American people blind. We're seeing a major wealth heist in this country where the wealth is siphoning to the top percentages, and the rest of us are unable to achieve the American dream anymore. And that is the real problem. Back when I was a kid growing up, my uncles were blue-collar workers. They were sprinkler men and dry cleaning men and factory workers, and they were able to support stay-at-home wives, 3 children, and homes in middle-class neighborhoods, being blue-collar full-time workers. That is not possible anymore today. You would need to have 2 full-time workers in the household, and even if you had 2 blue-collar full-time workers in the household, they would not be able to afford a home in a middle-class neighborhood, not in large swaths of this country. Sure, if you go into the middle of nowhere sort of areas, but even in my home state of Idaho, it's nearly impossible anymore for one person to buy a house unless they're going to buy it really far out in the middle of nowhere, which is right now my sister is actually doing that. She's a school teacher and she's buying a house on her own, but she's got to go way outside of Boise in order to buy this house. So that's the reality now of America. And that is what progressives are wanting to see change. We want a shot at the American dream that our parents were allowed to have, that our grandparents, especially the World War II generation, that they were really allowed to participate in. And it's not really available for us anymore. Student loan debt is outrageous. It used to be where you could work a summer job and you could save up enough money to buy yourself a car. You used to be able to do that. You used to be able to work your summer job and save up enough money to pay for your college tuition. You cannot do that anymore. It is impossible. You cannot buy your car with a summer job as a college student. You could not pay for your college education as a college student working your full-time job in the summer. You cannot do that anymore. That is a fundamental problem. That is not about, oh, well, it was your choice to go into debt and your choice to, you didn't need to do any of that stuff. You're right. None of us really, I guess, need to go to college. None of us really need to buy a car. None of us really need to buy a house. I don't know really where that leaves us in America. What is the American dream if none of us really need to do these things and you're going to point the finger and say, well, you didn't need to do that. It was your fault for getting in debt. Okay, I guess. Then what kind of a country is that? Especially a country that claims to be wealthy. So progressives want to be able to participate in the American dream. We don't want to go bankrupt because of medical bills that unfortunately you happen to draw the bad straw in the bunch and you got cancer. And so now you're going bankrupt, and that house that you worked really hard to buy, you have to sell because you have cancer. We don't want to live in this world anymore like this. When so many other countries, their citizens don't have to worry about that. We claim to be a wealthy nation. We claim to be the best nation on earth. And yet, unfortunately, you get sick, you go bankrupt. If you lose your job, you lose your house and your health insurance. If you want to go to college, it's going to cost you, and you're going to be spending pretty much your entire working career getting out of that debt. So that is the problem, and that is what progressives want to change. So Joe Biden winning, I don't think you could make the case that he would be beneficial for progressives because he is a progressive. So wipe that argument away, and now let's just think about which candidate winning would be better for the progressive movement, the overall health of the movement, in continuing on rather than being forgotten about or swept under the rug. Now, you could make another argument that the progressive movement, even though Bernie Sanders did not win the nomination, that did not stall the progressive movement, that it is alive and well and pressing forward. I agree with that somewhat. I think that this coming election could be the nail in the coffin to the progressive movement if Joe Biden wins. Now, I am going to tell you, I don't have an answer to this question. We're going to kind of suss it out together. I'm torn as to which candidate winning would be better for the overall health of the progressive movement. And the reason I feel that way is because, right now, there is still a bit of energy in the progressive movement, and there's a lot of people who are very anti-Joe Biden. I know I'm one of them, and there's a lot of progressives who are on that never Biden train. And they're still feeling like, no, we've got to grasp onto the progressive movement. We still have a shot. Now, I think that we have seen a lot of these progressive candidates that have primaried Democratic establishment candidates, and a lot of them won the primary, and they're going into this general election for congressional seats. There were quite a few progressives who beat out establishment candidates. We also saw that happen in 2018 with AOC and the Squad. However, I make the argument that I'm not so sure it was those I think it was a mixture of progressive policies and identity politics that allowed those groups of progressives to usher into Congress. In 2018, we saw a huge shift towards women in Congress. We saw that the Me Too movement and this overall energizing amongst women, that largely helped a lot of these women win their congressional primaries and then go on to win those congressional seats. So yes, a lot of them were progressive, but I'm not sure how much of their win was, what percentage of their win was because of progressive policies or because they were women and people were seeking change towards more women in power. Same thing right now in this 2020 cycle. We saw a lot of candidates topple Democratic establishment candidates. But what we also noticed was the trend was that many of them were people of color. So, and we now know that right now we're sort of in that new shift, right? So from 2016 to 2018, it was like the year of the women, the year of the woman. And now I think it's like the year of the person of color. So we saw a lot of people of color win those congressional seats. Or win those primaries, and now they're going to be going into the general election. So I'm not sure which percentage is because of the progressive policies or because of the identity politics. So I think we can make a case that because the Democratic establishment was able to really bury Bernie Sanders twice, it's 2016 and now 2020, because they were able to really bury him, that the Democratic establishment is believing that that Joe Biden is the guy that can win the general election. Now, the argument for Joe Biden winning that would be damning to the progressive movement is that if Joe Biden were to win, then it would signal to the Democratic establishment that they're right, that they don't need the Bernie Sanders progressive wing of the party, that they don't need to embrace progressive policies, that they don't need to embrace progressives, that they can win without progressives, or they might be convinced that progressives are going to vote for them no matter what, that progressives will get on that blue no matter who train, which we saw with, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is definitely on that train. And since she has been sort of the de facto new leader of the progressive movement, I think that the Democratic establishment is probably right. They're probably right that many progressives who really staunchly backed Bernie Sanders in 2016 are probably going to end up voting for Joe Biden because they believe he is the lesser of two evils, the lesser of two evil argument. So that is one argument against Joe Biden winning for the overall health of the progressive movement, that it essentially would signal to the Democratic establishment they don't need progressives. They could just bury progressives and say, see, you guys failed. Your policies fail. America doesn't really want you, you crazy socialists. As we heard Joe Biden say recently in a speech that I'm not a socialist, I beat the socialists, right? So it would signal to the Democratic establishment that they don't need progressives at all. And really what we're also seeing with the Democratic establishment is that they are now courting these never Trump Republicans. So they're going after, we saw Cindy McCain, she's endorsing Joe Biden. You've got guys like Colin Powell, these old military guard, you got military generals, military industrial complex guys, warmongers, Republicans, all just coming out in droves to support Joe Biden. So now that the Democratic Party is seeing that they can bring in all of these Republican voters, are they really going to attempt to ever get rid of them? Probably not. They're probably going to want to keep them. If those Republicans help them win in 2020 and Joe Biden wins, they're going to attempt to keep those Republicans in 2024. So they're going to say to the progressives, all we have to say to you folks is fascism, racism, sexism, xenophobia. You must vote for us or the worst is going to happen. We're going to end up with Hitler on our hands. We're going to end up with the worst regime. This is an existential crisis. You must vote for us. It's the lesser of two evils. How could you would be immoral if you didn't vote for us. They know that narrative works. So with the Republican never Trumpers, they say to them, we want to keep you in the fold. Those never Trumper Republicans say, yeah, but we like you because you're not Trump and you're not this bigot and all this, but we don't want you to be socialists. So the Democratic Party says, okay, we reject all of those policies that those crazy socialist Bernie Sanders progressives want, and instead we're going to continue to court you, these nice Republicans. We're bringing you now in. That would further move the Democratic Party to the right, further alienating the progressive left wing of the party, and further killing the progressive movement or sweeping it under the rug like they did in the 60s. And then, it took a few decades for the progressive movement to rise up again. They are thinking they can do that again, that they can squash progressives to where progressives don't rear their ugly heads again for another 30 years. So that would be the argument against Joe Biden being a Joe Biden win being beneficial to the progressive movement. In those instances, he would be very damaging to the progressive movement. The Democratic establishment would throw their middle finger at the progressives and say, we don't need you. And then they would court those never Trump Republicans and say, but we really need you. And that would become even more apparent if in 2024 the Republicans put forward a candidate who sort of goes back to the old Republican establishment. For example, the person they've been grooming for the 2024 election is Nikki Haley. Well, you've got a woman. She's a woman of color. She's been a governor. She's been the UN ambassador. She's not a Trump Republican. She's really the Republican old guard. So if they were to put Nikki Haley in as the candidate, if she were to, now I don't know if she would win the nomination because all the MAGA folks, but if the Republican Party were to somehow go back to their old, the old way they were, and if they were to just look at the Trump 4 years as a fluke, then that is going to be particularly damaging for the progressives, because what's going to happen is the Democratic voting establishment, the Democratic establishment that was able to gain those Cindy McCains of the world, those Cindy McCains of the world are going to be really interested in a Nikki Haley, as the candidate on the Republican side. Cindy McCain's going to say, whew, back to normal. Okay, I can go back to the Republican Party. They've restored themselves. So there's going to be a fight for those never Trump Republicans that defected and became Democrats, helped the Democrats win. The Democratic Party is going to fight for those voters. They are going to move more to the right if the Republican Party embraces a more establishment-based candidate. So really, and even if the Republican Party doesn't, so let's say the Republican Party, the voters, because they are the ones who get to decide, typically, the voters again put forward a non-establishment type in 2024 that's kind of from the MAGA cloth, then again, Democrats are going to continue to focus on those Cindy McCain, never Trumper types, say, stay with us. You don't want to go back over to them, stay with us, and we will distance ourselves from those socialists. So that's the argument against Joe Biden winning for the health of the Progressive Party or the progressive movement. It would mean probably the progressive movement would be swept under the rug for 30 more years. On the flip side, the case for a Joe Biden presidency to bring forward more, for the overall health of the progressive movement, the case for him would be that the progressive movement largely gained momentum under an Obama presidency. Under an Obama administration is when that progressive movement largely took hold. And it was because you had all of these voters in 2008 voting for change. They wanted change. They voted for Obama. And what did they get? More of the same. In fact, we saw the wealth discrepancy, or the disparity between the rich and the poor grow wider. The Democratic presidency, 8 years under a Democrat did not help with the wealth gap. 8 years under a Democratic president did not help us lower student debt, or it did help with lowering healthcare costs. I will say that the ACA did help a lot of people. Was it perfect? Absolutely not. Should we have had single payer in there? Yes, there was a backroom deal to not add in single payer because ultimately the Democratic Party was largely reliant on donors from the big pharma and big insurance industries. So they kind of they kept one. They didn't go too far against the big insurance companies, but. Largely, we didn't really see a whole lot of change under the Obama presidency. Instead, a lot of people lost their homes after our tax dollars were used to bail out the banks. So that upset a lot of people. And what we saw was this progressive anger that started to rise up through the Obama presidency because there was this constant feeling of being stabbed in the back. So knowing that is when the progressive movement really took hold, and that it was focused largely, laser focused on economic policies, because you're not going to claim racism and bigotry under an Obama presidency, right? So it really forced the voters to focus on the economics. And that's when a lot of voters said, this is crap and we need change, real change. And they embraced Bernie Sanders, an unknown senator from Vermont. They embraced him, they followed him, and a movement was born. So there is an argument to be made that under a Joe Biden presidency, that same momentum would happen when voters realize that Joe Biden is just giving us more of the same, that we're not getting any real progressive change, just tokenism here and there to keep you somewhat happy. They'll, especially if there's a Republican-controlled Senate or Republican-controlled House, it's very easy for the Democratic establishment to get away with nothing, or to get away with everything by doing nothing. What they would do is say, oh, we tried to get single payer through. We even put forward Medicare for all. If the Republicans control Congress, Joe Biden can look like a hero to the progressives. He would be able to write legislation, encourage legislation for Medicare for all and say, let's get Medicare for all, knowing that the Republicans won't vote for it. And so then he could say, well, it wasn't me, it was them. So that happens a lot in politics. They know when something's going to fail, they're safe in putting it forward, and it doesn't hurt their donors. They could just turn to their donors and say, it's not going to pass. Don't worry about it. Mitch McConnell's got the Senate. He's not going to let this pass. He's already said he's not going to let this pass. So don't worry. It's just good for us and our voters to put this legislation out there to make it look like this is what we're for. But don't worry, as they say in their back, smoke-filled rooms as they drink their drinks, their champagne. Well, these days with the Democrats, it's not smoke-filled rooms, right? It's caviar and champagne and lattes, right? So if Joe Biden is especially now, Joe Biden presidency would be especially good for the progressive movement if Joe Biden wins and the Democrats are able to take Congress, if they're able to take the House and the Senate, and you've got a fully Democratic-controlled executive branch and congressional branch. If you've got that legislative branch, if you've got them all Democratic-controlled, then they are exposed for who they really are, which is bought out by special interests, by big donors, and wealthy, rich people running around, the political elite. They would be exposed for who they are. So that would help the progressive movement largely the same way the progressive movement was able to grow under an Obama administration. But it would backfire if they're never able to gain control over Congress, because then they'll just say, well, no, but it wasn't us. It was Republicans. It was Republicans. And then we would be stuck with more of the same. And in that case, it would have been better for Trump to win, for Joe Biden to lose, and that way for progressives to turn to Democrats and say, you've lost because you've lost. You didn't court us. You didn't care about us. You gave us the middle finger over and over and over again, and you lost. And so you have to make change. You cannot win by courting never Trump Republicans. You need us, the progressives, in order for you to win. You cannot continue on this donor class, political class, elitism road. You have to meet us somewhere on this road in order to win. A big argument against Joe Biden winning would be if they win, then if the Democrats win, then they have absolutely no motivation to change. If they're winning, they're going to say, no, this is what wins. What wins is not your socialist Medicare for all policies. What wins are moderate, incrementalist policies that are more right-wing. That's what wins. That's what we're sticking to. So there's a case for him losing, because then it would say, then the progressive movement would be able to say to the Democratic establishment, you've now lost twice. You've now lost twice with your establishment candidates. You lost with Hillary Clinton. You lost with Joe Biden. When are you going to wake up and realize you need progressives if you want to win? So there's a big argument to be made that a Joe Biden loss would be actually more beneficial for the overall health of the progressive movement, that him losing would signal to the Democratic establishment that they have to change if they want to win. And the reality is they're not going to change if they win. So we can kind of go back in history. If we go back to 1968, when the Democratic establishment put Hubert Humphreys in as the candidate, which caused the riots over, was it George Wallace? Yeah, it was George Wallace who... it wasn't George Wallace. Who was it that was kind of the causer, the person who caused the riots? Let me just look this up. The 1968 Democratic. See if I can find this. Oh, McGovern. Sorry. It was George McGovern. That's right. George Wallace was like a big old racist, I think. He was a segregationist, right? So George McGovern was... I think this is right. Now, no, he was the one who ended up being the nominee in the 1972 presidential election. But in 1968, Hubert Humphreys, I believe, was it? Or no, who am I? Now you guys are in on my... Yeah, okay. So I don't think he even ran in a single Democratic primary, and he ended up getting the nomination because the Democratic establishment didn't want the progressive candidate to win, and so they went around the whole system, and they could do it legally, and they were able to put in the guy that they wanted, the more establishment guy. So that caused a bunch of riots at the DNC convention in 1968. So after that, after the Democratic base said, hey, no, we are progressive, we're anti-war, the Vietnam War was raging, people wanted out. They were really progressive in their policies. And they said to the Democratic establishment, we cannot believe you've done this. So they rioted. Well, in 1972, the Democratic Party says, okay. You win. We're going to give you your McGovern guy. We're going to give you this progressive. Then after the progressive got the nomination, there was a huge push amongst the Democratic elites to vote for Richard Nixon, the Republican. They came out with Democrats for Nixon. And they ensured that the progressive nominee would lose by a landslide. And I believe he only won 1 or 2 states when it came to the actual presidential election against Richard Nixon. So then when 1974 came along, 1976 came along, the Democrat establishment could say, see, guys, we can't do this. Your progressive policies lost, and they lost big. So we've got to go back to the establishment. No more of your antics. And that's how they were able to really suppress the progressive movement that was going on, sweep it under the rug for many, many, many years. Decades. They were able to do that for decades. So this time around, if you now try to think of that same scenario, but in today's time. So in 2016, Hillary Clinton lost, or Hillary Clinton won the nomination. So that was the same as they put forward their establishment candidate. We had the progressive candidate, Bernie Sanders. He was out there. They stole the election from Bernie Sanders in many different ways. Hillary Clinton ended up getting the nomination, and she lost. So it was very much like Hubert Humphreys. But fast forward to 2020, rather than the Democratic establishment doing what they did in 1972, where they said, okay, fine, you can have your progressive candidate. Let's see how well this goes. They knew that Bernie Sanders would have a serious shot at winning. And the Democratic establishment cannot have a Bernie Sanders as the president of the United States. They would rather Donald Trump win. They really would rather Donald Trump win. They don't want Bernie Sanders because Bernie Sanders would make way too many radical shifts in policy that would hurt their big money donors. He is not a loyal Democrat. He's not loyal to the Democratic Party. He doesn't care about the donations that come funneling into the Democratic Party. So Bernie Sanders would do what was best for the American people, not what was best for the Democratic Party. And that is something that the Democratic establishment could not have happen. So rather than doing what happened in 1972, where the progressive candidate ended up getting that nomination, they instead ensured Bernie Sanders did not get it. He was too much of a threat. McGovern wouldn't have won, but Bernie Sanders had a real shot at winning. So they instead decided to bury Bernie Sanders, give us that Democratic establishment candidate, Joe Biden. Now, if Joe Biden were to lose the same way that McGovern lost, now Joe Biden's the establishment guy and McGovern was the progressive guy, but if Joe Biden loses, then the progressive wing of the party can do to the Democratic Party what the Democratic Party did to the progressives back in 1972, which is point at them and say, you lost again. When are you going to wake up? If you want any sort of power, you have to start courting the left wing of your party, which is not even left wing in when you compare the policies to the rest of the Western world. They're very moderate policies. Things like education, free college education is a very moderate policy that's already in existence largely in Europe. Healthcare, our tax dollars paying for healthcare for everybody, again, is something that they do all throughout Europe. And in Canada and in Australia, a lot of these countries are already seeing these policies. It's considered very middle of the road. Everybody's for it, left and right in those countries. So if Bernie Sanders were to, Bernie Sanders lost. So if Joe Biden were to lose, it would possibly cause this, hopefully, some introspection amongst the Democratic Party where they would say, well, shoot, if we want to win, maybe we should actually start looking at our progressive wing rather than courting all of these Republicans and continuing to shift towards the right and satisfying our very small percentage of top donors. So I don't know which, I think a Joe Biden win is only beneficial to the progressive movement if Joe Biden or if Democrats are also able to gain full control over Congress. If they can win the House and the Senate, then I think a fully Democratic controlled unit there in Washington would be exposing. It would show them as the frauds that they are, that they're not really truly for the people, that they're for their big money interests, that they continue to bury the progressive voices in Congress and ignore them and just say, oh, those silly little things yapping away, they don't represent America. They would be exposed. And they wouldn't have anybody to point the finger at. Trump wouldn't be at office. They couldn't say, oh my gosh, we're having an existential threat. They couldn't say, well, it was Mitch McConnell who stopped us, because the Republicans. Now, they did that during the time that Obama had full control. They stopped short of certain things. And then people say, well, it was because of the Republicans, even though Democrats had supermajority. They definitely could have pushed policies through when they had the supermajority and they had full control, but they chose not to. They choose to wait until they don't have full control in order to go after quote unquote progressive policies, because then they know they're going to have to compromise. They're going to have to do middle of the road sort of legislation, or they know it will fail completely. That's how they operate. They never do anything radical when they have full control, even though that's the time they should. So part of me thinks, a Joe Biden presidency is only going to be beneficial for the progressive movement if and only if the Democrats can gain full control over everything in Washington. Now, they won't have control over the Supreme Court, but they haven't in many, many years. The Supreme Court has been right-wing leaning since the 70s, since Nixon had 4 SCOTUS appointments. And that is when the courts went to the right, and they've been to the right for the last 50 years. So they haven't had a liberal SCOTUS in a long time. So that doesn't really matter, only if cases make it to the Supreme Court. But, the Supreme Court says often, Roberts says, we don't really want to be legislating from the bench. The only thing we do is just interpret law. So if you want laws to change, then make new laws. That's what you need to do. Or, make laws that are and ensure that they're not in conflict with other with the Constitution, things like that. So that is now, the progressive movement, if Joe Biden wins, then you're going to have people like me often criticizing him and his administration. You're going to see like TYT, which I would say has moved away from progressivism, at least what I would call progressivism. They would largely get back on that progressive train again, and because they would be criticizing Joe Biden. You would have The Hill. They would be criticizing Joe Biden. Everybody would be criticizing Joe Biden here on YouTube and on the independent media space. So I think in that regard, it would be beneficial for the growing progressive base for getting them back on track and focused on the economic policies that are truly robbing the average American blind right now and that need to desperately change. So it's a toss-up for me as to which one would be more beneficial for the progressive movement. It's a toss-up. Because, if Trump wins, then I don't have a chance to criticize Joe Biden and the progressive policies or the lack of progressive policies that he's going to have, because it would be Trump. And we would see the Democrats continue down this, we have an existential crisis on our hands narrative. I'm very afraid of what they would do. I was afraid after the impeachment failed or the removal of Trump from office. I was really afraid after that failed. I was worried about what would they do next. And wow, they did a lot next. They are definitely in my mind fueling very much a lot of these the riots and unrest going on across the country. They want to make that look like, Americans are really truly battling this horrible racism and bigotry that Donald Trump has marched in. They want that narrative really firmly in people's minds, like this is really awful, and so you must vote for us because Donald Trump is a serious threat. And the virus, largely, I think, keeping us shut down. We're about to go into more lockdowns. I think that is largely also to try to harm Donald Trump. So, that's scary to me. And then I would be really afraid of what they would do in the next 4 years if Trump were to win again. But come 2024, they're going to have a real rough time of holding on to that narrative when Trump is not the candidate for the Republican Party. And when it's somebody like Nikki Haley, I don't know where the Democratic Party, what kind of narrative they're going to use in the Kamala Harris will need to be elected in 2024, because it won't be Joe Biden. It'll be Kamala Harris at that point. She's going to take over. If Joe Biden wins, Kamala Harris will be president within 3 years. Joe Biden will be asked to step down, and he will. And it'll be Kamala. And then Kamala will be the one running in 2024. So, yeah, I'm really afraid of both outcomes for different reasons. I'm afraid because if Trump were to lose, I do think that the Republican base will come, if Democrats thought Trump was bad, whoever they put forward in 4 years is going to be much worse. The people will be angrier, and they will put forward somebody who is more intense, because somebody who reflects the intensity of their anger. That's scary. And then, you'll have Democrats saying, oh, well, Trump was just bad on Twitter, but this person, whoever this person is really bad. This person's really, really bad. But if Democrats win, I'm afraid if Democrats win, that's what's going to happen in 4 years, that the Republican base will put forward somebody much scarier. And I'm afraid if Democrats lose, what lengths they'll go to in the next 4 years to remove Trump from office, or to destroy America to prove that they were right, that Trump was destroying America, when I don't know if it was Trump or if it was, then it's kind of like a debate to have, who destroyed America. For those of us that are more independent, I think that there's a lot of damage that's being done right now. So, and not necessarily by Trump, but from the Democrats. I do think that they're quite dangerous. And so, so I'm scared either way. I'm really, truly scared either way. Now, I'm going to go ahead and look at some of your chats. Thank you guys so much for your contributions to the show. I really appreciate you. Let me go ahead and kind of look through some of the things you guys are saying and see who do you think? Now's the time. Who do you think would be better for the overall health of the progressive movement, a Joe Biden presidency or a continued Donald Trump presidency? Love to hear from you. Tyrone Sanford, keep it up. Thank you very much. Witch Hunt, thank you. Dan Values, Trump has to go. Biden is already moving towards progressive policies. We are in a constitutional crisis. Geez Louise. Yeah, I don't buy that narrative. I hear it a lot, that Trump is a fascist, that he is undermining the Constitution. They're talking about him, talking about the election and whether or not he would concede. Trump, by now, I feel like everybody should know Trump is all talk. I don't know why anybody listens to anything he says or tweets anymore. That it's all, what he says is all just posturing. He never actually follows through. So to me, that's like, why listen to him? Why don't we just look at the actions in and of themselves? And also, when it comes to the election, Hillary Clinton very clearly said that Democrats should absolutely not concede under any circumstances to Trump during the election. So she also said something very dangerous, I believe, for the health of our elections. So that is all, and I don't really know if Biden is truly moving towards progressive policies or if he's just trying to gain votes. His record is not progressive. He's had 50 years in government. He has not been progressive. So he has proven to lie to constituents and not follow through. That is a proven record of 50 years in governance. So I don't think he suddenly is changing. And suddenly this time we can trust him. Bomag 803, Biden is not a progressive. That's right. Alex Arvanitis Trump left WHO Paris Accords, proposes defunding NSF, NIH, CDC in 2021, and is hostile to climate science. I'm voting Biden. Please do so too. I think that when it, for one, I just want to make this clear, not one country who signed on to the Paris Climate Accord actually followed through. So even though the U.S. backed out of it, no country, not one, actually followed through and met the guidelines of the Paris Climate Accord. So that was more of a virtue signaling sort of document. None of them actually did it. Not once, not even France. The WHO, that is, they take a lot of money from China and a lot more money from Bill Gates. A lot of people are very suspect in both of those in guiding us when it comes to public health. I don't know if we should be allowing foreign countries and their influence to guide our public health when it would be very beneficial to them potentially to not see a healthy, thriving America. And Bill Gates, I know a lot of people have this real sinister idea of Bill Gates, like he's just really this, like he's just trying to microchip us all and vaccinate us all. I don't know if he's like some sinister guy just trying to make a bunch of money. He's got all the money in the world. But I do think he's, to me, the same as an anti-vaxxer, but for vaccinations. There's anti-vaxxers and they're just like really viscerally anti-vaxxers. They believe it in their core. It's not that they have any special interests or they're trying to make a bunch of money. They genuinely believe, right? They're genuinely anti-vaxxers. I think Bill Gates is like that, but when it comes to vaccinations, I think he's just really, really, in his heart, he really is pro-vaccination and he really wants us all to be vaccinated. And so he really pushes forward with that. And that really makes a lot of people feel very suspect of him. So, these organizations, I'm very skeptical of government organizations anyway. I don't just automatically, for example, when it comes to military brass, if they have a recommendation to march into war, I don't listen to that just right off of the surface. So any government organization I'm going to be skeptical of and wonder about, what are the real motivations? Is there money to be made? Are there people that are involved? Are they allowed to be invested in other things? I think that's like a very, him wanting to defund, that's also a very Republican viewpoint. Republicans by nature want less government regulation. C. Prouse, you don't think there'll be a strong third way option by 2024? Maybe. It really depends on how 2020 shakes out. There might be, if Joe Biden wins, there really might be this real strong push for a new candidate, somebody more progressive, somebody for the workers. And we might actually see a united front from the Trump voters who were the pro-worker, down home, middle of America Trump voter, and the Bernie Sanders voters of 2016. I think there could be a united sort of populist movement that comes together by 2024. That's possible. David Lindo, thank you so much. Levon Huey, I can't beat that $12,000 donation. Sorry, that's not really $12,000. That's, I don't know, PHP, is that, what is that? That is... whoops, I thought it was Philippine peso. So that's from the Philippines. That's what that is, guys. Anthony Valenti, thank you. Robert Craig, thank you so much. Sugar fan page, thank you. Keep spreading the truth, Kim. Thank you. Cool Joe Scott, thank you. Christian Edwardson, thank you. Pico 67, if you're an indoctrinated anti-racist, vote Biden. Yeah. Kevin Slims, Hillary never said that. Please give full context. So you don't think Hillary said that Democrats should fight tooth and nail? She was saying that, in the same way that Donald Trump says it, which is if it's a contested election, if the votes, that we should if it's contested, that they need to not give up. What she was referring to was similar to like the Bush-Gore, when there was a bit of like giving up, and she's saying like, don't give up, keep pushing, keep pushing. Trump says the same sort of thing when he says, no, if it's a contested election, I'm not going to relinquish power. So both of them in context are saying kind of the same thing. That's sort of my point. Rick von Himmlich, thank you. Bill Gates is a self-admitted eugenicist. Yeah, I think he's like worried about population, which I think is a legitimate concern, considering that even in my dad's lifetime, I believe the Earth's population has tripled. It's scary. We have a lot of people. Right now, we have 150,000 people die every day, and 300,000 babies are born every day. So we're rapidly increasing. That's every day. Every day, 150,000 people die, and every day, 300,000 babies are born. Every day. That's crazy. That's a lot of people. Nit Gundo, Trump's base blindly listens to him. Yeah, they do, which is really interesting because a lot of his policies are not very Republican in nature, and yet you've got all these Republicans now going towards Trump on things that should be more democratic sort of policies, like less war. You know, Trump's always like, less war. These wars are ridiculous. We got to get out of these wars. Now you got all these Republicans. You got all these Republicans who voted for Bush twice, and these Republicans are now saying, yeah, less war. You know, I mean, it's really sort of this. It's mind blowing. And now you've got all of these elitist, big money. You know, the wealthiest people in the country support Democrats. What does that tell you? Back in the day, it used to be Republicans were for the big money. Now it's Democrats are for the big money. Big tech, big money interests. Those are all favoring Democrats. We're living in a very interesting time shift. And I believe we're seeing a shift in parties happening right in front of us, the same way the Democratic Party and the Republicans Party, those parties shifted in the 60s. I think we're seeing another shift happening right in front of us, where I wouldn't be surprised if in 10 years the Republican Party is firmly the party of workers. Weird, but seems to be somewhat happening. So we'll see. We'll see. Roger Meadows, 25 states have direct ballot. What you want Fed do state Medicare for I don't banning well, Roger, thank you. I don't know what this I'm sorry. Thank you though. Okay, is there any others on here? Guys, thank you so much for watching. Let's see. Yeah, so this is going to be well, anyway, okay. It looks like this is it. And I've gone for nearly an hour now. So I appreciate you guys for watching in this kind of interesting sort of road to go down, this sort of hypothetical of which outcome would be better for the progressive movement overall, a Trump win or a Biden win when it comes to the overall health of the progressive movement. Now, this, I want to remind you or tell you if you've never known that this is the third go around for the progressive movement. There was a push for progressive policies. The very first push was by Republican Teddy Roosevelt back when it was, back in when was that, the 20s? And or the teens when it was Teddy Roosevelt. It was in the early 1900s. There was a push for progressivism, which was less money in politics. Now he wasn't so anti-war like the subsequent progressive movements, but definitely for the working class and not so much for the elites and the big corporations. That ended up getting buried away because the progressives couldn't win, and it was splitting the vote. And so because they had like a third party option, which was Teddy Roosevelt, and it was splitting the vote. And so people eventually just kind of went back into the fold because they wanted the lesser of two evils. Then you fast forward to the 60s, there was another rising of the progressive movement that got swept under the rug. And now here we are again. There is a real threat of it being swept under the rug. That's my point with this. There is a real threat that the progressive movement just dies and goes away for many, many decades. For 40 years, which seems to be sort of every 40 years, it kind of comes back around. So 40, 50 years. So, if you want to wait another 40 or 50 years, I don't think I'll be alive for that. But if you want to wait, there is a real possibility that the progressive movement gets swept under the rug, everybody falls back in line, and we just continue on as we've been continuing on for however long. It's a real threat, so it's a real question. Who would be better for the progressive movement, the overall health of the progressive movement? That is the question. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you would like to email me your thoughts, I would love to hear from you. My email is kim@kimiverson.com. You can email me. Also, of course, when this video goes live, I believe you'll be able to make comments in the comment section. I often do read through the comments on my videos, so I do, I listen to what you guys say, and it helps shape my thoughts. And I sometimes, if you bring up some really great points, and then I go and I research that. And so I appreciate your comments. I appreciate your emails. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you for being here. Thank you so much for your contributions to the show. And I hope you guys have a great weekend. Thank you so much for watching.